Part 2. The Arabs of ninth grade public school were desert wandering Bedouins with sun-baked faces crenellated with deep wrinkle lines, metaphorically mirrored in the parched soil of the historic world they call home. The Pakistani Muslims washed their clothes in a local river, rubbing piles of sarongs against the rocks while sharing a laugh with their neighbors doing the same. These were ancient, backward people living in an ancient, backward tradition. 10 years of indoctrination, the story of my own ancestry, preceded our discovery of these unfortunate people. 10 years of memorizing dates of Western milestones. The Greeks, the Romans, the monks in medieval science, Leonardo, Columbus, the Pope, and of course Galileo, Henry VIII, Newton, Louis XIV, and of course the American Revolution. I cannot fathom the maturity, the enlightenment required of a 14-year-old kid to watch the films, read the books, and hear the lectures we were issued during that school year without concluding that our culture was superior to those adopted by the Islamic societies. Who would learn about these discoveries and achievements, yet prefer to live beating their wet robes against a smooth river stone? My own mother had no fewer than 12 electric motor-driven household appliances, a washing machine chief among them. There was little evidence to support the notion that there was even one motor-driven apparatus in the entire Pakistani village, much less electricity or the technology to supply it. This was simply a world that turned its back to progress. So it is only natural to assume their spirituality was as backward a system as their technology and politics. Christianity brought the West a form of capitalism that inspired greatness. Islam was simply the voodoo of a primitive people. And just as greed was understood to be the radioactive rod of capitalist power, jihad was assumed to be the fuel of Islamic fundamentalism, fanaticism, an important distinction between the two economies, which simply stretched the masks of Christ and Muhammad over the opponent's politics to energize their respective people. How can one fault a simple man like Mr. Condell for getting lost in this complex plotline? I would like now to borrow from one of Pat's own countrymen, a certain bloke with whom I suspect he shares some particular degree of pride in homeland. And I quote, "If there is much misunderstanding in the West about the nature of Islam, there is also much ignorance about the debt our own culture and civilization owe to the Islamic world. It is a failure which stems, I think, from the straitjacket of history, which we have inherited. The medieval Islamic world from Central Asia to the shores of the Atlantic was a world where scholars and men of learning flourished. But because we have tended to see Islam as the enemy of the West, as an alien culture, society, and system of belief, we have tended to ignore or erase its great relevance to our own history." And that was from a lecture to Oxford University by Prince Charles. The context of the 70s zeitgeist curriculum that I just referenced was a grievous miscarriage of national education. One, I fear, that overshadowed the current reactionary fiasco now taking place in the Texas textbook debates. And, that's another topic. One that shaped the minds of generations of my own countrymen, honest, patriotic Americans, preoccupied building businesses and careers, starting families, and sending kids to college. People just too focused on their families and the neighborhood to bother with the details, like polishing up after ninth grade social studies. I hold no malice for all the Joe the plumbers who despise my view of the issue. I simply chose to waste free time doing just that, reading and writing to repair the curtain of my overstressed neighborhood. torn by irresponsible, influential loudmouths like Pat Condell. No greater case for the cause of a cultural center in downtown Tribeca can be made than by sloppy scholarship against it. Thank you, Mr. Condell. Your effort was so poorly corroborated, I simply smile at the suspicion. You are perhaps more calculating than I initially believed. Perhaps your hair-triggered sensitivity to the slightest imagined suggestion, excuse me that I borrow that from you, of the Islamic Cultural Center should have been a clue. The popular mystery of the Cultural Center's funding source at this time in the public discussion is simply too ironic to ridicule in light of recent findings. I'm curious whether he simply felt it unconscionable to let an opportunity to implicate the Saudis, void of evidence, slip through his fabricated web of a diabolic Islamic scheme to overthrow Tribeca. This might explain his swapping and implication of Saudi collaboration for an actual case involving them while still capitalizing on the dramatic emphasis of a dark Islamic conspiracy. So I'll spare him the shame of dwelling on the way things turned out. He was on a roll, and no absence of fact was going to put the brakes on his tasteless, pontificating momentum. In fact, a significant percentage of the plan is backed by finances from a certain Kingdom Foundation created and run by real estate investor and philanthropist Al-Walid bin Talal, with major holdings in American corporations like Apple, PepsiCo, and a little media dynamo called News Corp, which also happens to be the parent company of Fox News. This, one may recall, is the same Kingdom Foundation which offered $10 million to the city of New York as aid after the events of immediately following the events of 9/11. Then Mayor Giuliani gained political points by showing all evil Arabs from the outset that New York and America's view of Islam was uncompromising in its resentment of the crime and singular in its focus of the guilty. He sent the money right back where it came from. I guess that's Wall Street, huh? It gives pause to speculate on both how much collateral damage was done in the area of America's matured understanding of the Islamic equation, and whether there would have even been a Giuliani campaign for the presidency in 2008. And don't simply take my word for it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you right now, I specifically adopted Mr. Cordell's use of conjecture to frame the question. The implication that Muslim terrorists are involved in the planning or construction of the Islamic Cultural Center is near the core of this entire issue. That's the end of part 2. Please come to part 3. Follow me. I'll be right there.